President Obama wants the facts. Let's play hardball. Good evening. I'm Chris Matthews down in Washington. Leading off tonight, the president weighs in. It was inevitable, perhaps, and it happened today. President Obama was asked about the shooting death of 17-year-old Trayvon Martin. Mr. Obama said all of us have to do some soul searching now to figure out how something like this could happen. And then he said this.
My main message is to the parents of Trayvon Martin. You know, if I had a son, he'd look like Trayvon.
Wow. Well, the last time the president was asked about a racially charged police incident, the moment backfired on him when he sharply criticized the Cambridge, Massachusetts police officer. This time, I think he got it just right. Plus, yet another sign that Republicans see a winnable election slipping away from them. Peggy Noonan told Mitt Romney today in her column that comes out tomorrow that it's time to get off the goofball express, as she puts it. Enough with the cheesy grits, the jeans, the singing, being compulsively pleasant, and calling your opponents lightweights. Act like a president. Well, does he have it in him? That's the question. Or is he, as his aide confessed the other day, an etch-a-sketch himself? Also, it was 2 years ago today that President Obama signed the major historic health care law. Its unpopularity has proved to be resilient, unfortunately. So has Mitt Romney's hypocrisy on the issue. As he continued today, the charade that Obamacare and Romney care aren't essentially the same thing. And you know you can't wait for it. Mad Men's 5th season begins Sunday night. We'll introduce you to some of the real Mad Men who brought Madison Avenue presidential politics back in 1964. We begin with President Obama weighing in on the Trayvon Martin shooting. Joe Williams covers the White House for Politico. Michelle Bernard's an MSNBC political analyst. You know, let's listen to the president. Here's what we know. By the way, let's start with the facts as we know them. And please correct me. We're going to argue some of these facts, perhaps, as we know them. The official police reports and statements regarding the shooting of Trayvon Martin. Sanford police observed Zimmerman with what they described as a wet back covered in grass, a bloody nose, and blood on the back of his head when they initially responded to the scene of the shooting. The Sanford city manager, Norton Bonaparte, says Zimmerman claims in his police statement that he was returning to his truck to meet with police when he was attacked by Trayvon Martin. But a 16-year-old girl on the phone with Trayvon Martin immediately before the shooting claims that Trayvon told her he was being followed by a strange man, and she heard a man approach Martin to ask what he was doing here. And so we have very sketchy, conflicting evidence, if you want to call it that, Joe, of what actually happened. The president today, however, raised this to a presidential question. He said he wants to find out what happened. He also said if he had a son, he would look like Trayvon, bringing it back to the ethnic fact that we're all familiar with here.
Well, and that was why the statement was so perfect, something for him to say and elevate the conversation, not drag it down into politics, but not deliver pathos either. It was something that showed a relatable moment. He knows, he is telegraphing that he understands what's going on and how the parents might feel about this. So I think it was a very important statement for him to make. It quells a lot of critics and keeps the conversation.
Quells a lot of critics.
Quells some of the critics. A lot of people in
from people who were saying what?
From people who were saying.
Describe the criticism.
The criticism was that Obama needs to say something. We have the first black president here. We have what appears to be a clear-cut case of racial bias, or at least that racial overtones in this case.
Well, we're going to hear some of them in a moment. Yeah,
absolutely. The president needs to say something about this. Commander-in-Chief, he knows the experience. This is a moment for him to step in and advocate for the African-American community.
I think another thing that's relevant here is that his Attorney General and close friend Eric Holder, who also happens to be African-American, is out there investigating, perhaps on the road to some kind of hate crime prosecution.
Absolutely. And the Attorney General, the Assistant Attorney General for the Civil Rights Division is Hispanic. One of the most important things that we've seen, not just in addition to the Justice Department actually taking a look at this, when the president spoke today, he also let us understand when he says that this is what my son would look like. What we know is that we're seeing it's powerful for many reasons. Most importantly, this was not some kid from the hood who might have been acting out, where people might necessarily say, well, you know, he was engaging in criminal activity. This is a young man. He's well educated. He comes from a middle-class family. Mother and father love him. He was armed with nothing but a bag of Skittles and iced tea, and some lunatic looks at him and says, here's a black man in the neighborhood, and I'm going to shoot him. Maybe not. We don't. don't know exactly what happened, but we know that racial bias was involved.
We know he was shot.
And we know he was shot.
by that guy.
We know he was shot by that guy, and we know he's dead. And the president said this could be any black man in America.
I thought it was wonderfully said. I mean, I'm white, obviously, and I just thought it was a statement about our country that was well done. And it was done with political deliberation, which is the way he has to always speak.
Yeah.
He has to almost speak like a pope. He has to get it right the first time. Your thoughts?
Well, and that's part of the problem. It's a blessing and a curse for the White House. The curse is that when you have situations like these that come up, many eyes in the African-American community turn towards the White House because we've never been here before.
Yeah.
One of these presidents is not like the other. Therefore, looking to him to make a statement either one way or the other puts a lot of pressure that none of his predecessors, or very few of his predecessors, have, with the possible exception of Kennedy back in the 60s when Martin Luther King ended up in jail and he called the family.
Well, his
That's
tone
a good
was
impulse
perfect.
there, and that was an impulse. This was really presidential behavior. Anyway, let's listen to the president now from today, and his first comments came today on the shooting death of Trayvon Martin.
My main message is to the parents of Trayvon Martin. You know, if I had a son, he'd look like Trayvon. And, you know, I think they are right to expect that all of us as Americans are going to take this with the seriousness it deserves, and that we're going to get to the bottom of exactly what happened.
Well, finding out what happened is probably the first part. Maybe I'm different than a lot of other commentators. I want to find out what happened. I mean, you have to find out in court ultimately, but formally. But what happened in this terrible case? The guy's armed. He knows he has this stand your ground law on his side. He's acting like some kind of pseudo policeman. He has no authority, whatever, and yet he's on some kind of neighborhood watch thing. It is a toxic mix, and he seems to have a point of view that's clear that this guy is a criminal.
Well, he was a suspect even before anything started, because we have evidence, or at least there are tapes purporting to show that Zimmerman repeatedly had called into question black men walking back and forth through his neighborhood.
Now let's listen to something that I think is serious business. Here is a tape which we here have boosted the sound so you can hear something that this guy Zimmerman says under his breath. It sounds to me, on listening to it a couple of times, like the F word, which we don't speak on television, and another word which is clearly recognizable to anyone watching right now as a racial slur. Let's listen to the tape.
Okay, which entrance is that he's heading towards?
The back entrance.
Are you following him?
Yeah.
Okay, we don't need you to do that.
Well, we cut it off there. I don't know why we cut it off there.
Yeah, I have listened to the enhanced version of the tape. For whatever reason, it was cut off here. But if you
No, it was
listen,
apparently there. I didn't hear it this time.
There. It was in the initial part where he's whispering on his breath. Obviously, it sounds like he's moving. Effing.
Yeah.
I'm going to say it. I don't think we should hide it. The American public needs to know. If you listen to that tape, he says "effing coon" under his breath. That is a racial
I heard that when I was back in the studio.
It is unmistakable. It is undeniable. If you listen to the enhanced version, that in and of itself makes it a hate crime. That's why the Justice Department is involved. It's why the FBI is going to have to investigate this case. And if state authorities do not prosecute and properly investigate this, we will see a prosecution, I believe, under the federal hate crime legislation, because what we have seen is that if this killing appears to be have been racially motivated.
If you are in court and you're a prosecutor and/or a member of a jury or a defense attorney, you will have to contend with this boosted sound of what he said on that 9/11.
The prosecution is going to have to contend with it, but this is how they build their case. One, Mr. Zimmerman has a history of making a lot of phone calls to the police whenever he sees black men in his neighborhood. Number two, you can hear it very clearly on the tape. The police ask him, "Are you following this person?" And he says, "Yes." They say, "We don't need you to do this." He keeps doing it. Then you add in what sounds like him saying "effing coon."
No, I heard it. It's not just sound like anybody watching this show, if they were sitting in my office a few minutes ago, would have heard it. Would have heard it. Let's do it again. It's the effing word followed by a word we all recognize, unfortunately, as racially evil. Really, go ahead.
It is evil.
Let's listen. Let's listen.
Okay, which entrance is that he's heading towards?
The back entrance.
Are you following him?
Yeah.
Okay, we don't need you to do that.
You hear it. He says effing coon. They say we don't need you to do that. He continues to follow him, and you put all that together along with Trayvon speaking with his girlfriend, and she's saying run from him. You have motive, and it's clearly based on racial bias.
This is going to be one tricky trial if this guy is prosecuted, and it could be murder 1, 2, 3, whatever. There's all kinds of possibilities here. But now we've got two levels here, Joe, the reporting we have to do here. One is, as we said, the Justice Department is moving on this case as what looks to be a case of a hate crime, looks to be, or sounds to be, clearly. And then they have the second issue. They've got a grand jury down there. So locally, the president, by the way, covered all the bases today. He said, local, state, federal, we have to all get into action and do the right thing here.
Well, and to that last point, actions speak louder than words in this particular case. The Justice Department was sent down a few days ago in addition to a community activism team to try to get things going and make sure that they do the right thing in Florida. The problem, however, going back to your initial point, is that we've got a law here, the Stand Your Ground law, that is being replicated all across the country. Yeah. As far as we know, that was one of the trigger points of this particular shooting. That you mentioned that the shooter apparently felt like he had the law on his side. That's a really powerful thing, especially when you consider the extended history we've had of profiling, of stopping people in wrong neighborhoods in this country. I mean, it happened to me, it happened to my dad in the 50s, happened to me in the 80s and the 90s, now it's happening again, and now we have the added mix of what sounds like permissible violence in order to take
Can I just ask one really important question? When we talk about the Stand Your Ground law...
this law has been used by criminals as well.
Absolutely.
By people who are normal criminals, who normally, as a part of their life, commit crimes of use this as a defense when they kill somebody.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's why it's a flawed piece of legislation.
Well, but I think the an important point to make is, regardless of the fact that this guy felt protected by the law, I can't imagine any black man in the United States of America who believes that if he were to stand his ground under this law and be the shooter and the victim was white, he would not be prosecuted. He would have been arrested, he'd be in jail, and he would be awaiting trial.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That law does not cover blacks.
The history.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Joe Williams. I could say have a happy weekend, but it's going to be a disturbing weekend for a lot of people. Michelle Bernard.